Chapter 77 Haydée. Scarcely had the Count's horses cleared the angle of the boulevard than Albert, turning toward the Count, burst into a loud fit of laughter, much too loud, in fact, not to give the idea of its being rather forced. "Well," said he, "I will ask you the same question which Charles IV put to Catherine de Medicis after the massacre of Saint Bartholomew. How have I played my little part?" "To what do you allude?" asked Monte Cristo. "To the installation of my rival at Monsieur Danglars." "What rival?" "Ma foi, what rival? Why, your protege, Monsieur Andrea Cavalcanti." "Ah, no joking, Viscount, if you please. I do not patronize Monsieur Andrea, at least not as concerns Monsieur Danglars. I should blame you for that, if the young man really needed your help. But happily for me, he can dispense with it." "What, do you think he is playing his addresses?" "I am certain of it. Watch his rolling eyes, listen to his loving sighs. He aspires to the hand of the proud Eugenie. Why, I have made a rhyme, on my word. Well, it was not my fault. Never mind. I repeat, he aspires to the hand of the proud Eugenie. But what does that signify, so long as they favor your suit? But it is not the case, my dear Count. On the contrary, I am repulsed on all sides." "What, on both sides?" "It is so indeed. Mademoiselle Eugenie scarcely answers me, and Mademoiselle d'Armilly, her confidante, does not speak to me at all." "But the father has the greatest regard possible for you," said Monte Cristo. "He? Oh no, he has plunged 1,000 daggers into my heart, tragedy weapons, I own, which, instead of wounding, sheathed their points in their own handles, but daggers which he nevertheless believed to be real and deadly. Jealousy indicates affection. True, but I am not jealous. He is. Of whom? Of Debray? No, of you. Of me? I will engage to say that before a week is past the door will be closed against me." "You are mistaken, my dear Viscount." "Prove it to me." "Do you wish me to do so?" "Yes." "Well, I am charged with the commission of endeavoring to induce in Monsieur de le Comte de Morcerf to make some definite arrangement with the Baron." "But whom are you charged?" "By the Baron himself." "Oh," said Albert, with all the cajolery of which he was capable. "You surely will not do that, my dear Count." "Certainly I shall, Albert, as I have promised to do it." "Well," said Albert, with a sigh, "it seems you are determined to marry me." "I am determined to try and be on good terms with everybody, at all events," said Monte Cristo. "But apropos to Debray, how is it that I have not seen him lately at the Baron's house? There has been a misunderstanding." "What, with the Baroness?" "No, with the Baron." "Has he perceived anything?" "Ah, that's a good joke." "Do you think he suspects?" said Monte Cristo, with a charming naivete. "Where have you come from, my dear Count?" said Albert. "From Congo, if you will. It must be farther off than that. But what do I know of your Parisian husbands?" "Oh, my dear Count, husbands are pretty much the same everywhere. An individual of any country is a fair specimen of the race." "But then, what can have led to the quarrel between Danglars and Debray? They seemed to understand each other so well," said Monte Cristo, with renewed energy. "Ah, now you are trying to penetrate into the mysteries of Isis, in which I am not initiated. When Monsieur Andrea Cavalcanti has become one of the family, you could ask him that question." The carriage stopped. "Here we are," said Monte Cristo. "It's only 10:30. Come in." "Certainly I will. My carriage shall take you back." "No, thank you. I gave orders for my coupe to follow me." "There it is, then," said Monte Cristo, as he stepped out of the carriage. They both went into the house. The drawing-room was lighted up. They entered it. "You will make tea for us, Baptistin," said the Count. Baptistin left the room without waiting to answer, and in 2 seconds reappeared, bringing a tray, ready prepared, and appearing to have sprung from the ground, like the repasts in fairy tales. "Really, my dear Count," said Morcerf, "what I admire you is not so much your riches, for perhaps there are people wealthier than you, nor is it your wit, for Beaumarchais might have possessed as much, but it is your manner of being served, without any question, in a moment, in a second. It is as if they guessed what you wanted by your manner of ringing, and made a point of keeping everything you want in constant readiness. What you say is perhaps true. They know my habits. For instance, you shall see, how do you wish to occupy yourself during tea time? Well, I should like to smoke. Monte Cristo took the gong and struck it once. In about the space of a second, a private door opened, and Ali appeared, bringing him 2 chibuks filled with excellent lactacia. It is quite wonderful, said Albert. Oh no, it is as simple as possible, replied Monte Cristo. Ali knows I generally smoke whilst I'm taking my tea or coffee. He has heard that I ordered tea. He knows that I brought you home with me. When I summoned him, he guessed the reason, and as he comes from a country where hospitality is especially manifested by the pipe, he brings 2 chibuks instead of 1. Certainly you give a most commonplace air to your explanation, but it is not the less true that you— Ah, but what do I hear? And Morcerf inclined his head toward the door, through which sounds seemed to issue resembling those of a guitar. Ma foi, my dear Viscount, you are fated to hear the music this evening. You have only escaped from the piano of Mademoiselle Danglars to be attacked by the guzla of Haydée. Haydée, what an adorable name! And there, then, really women who bear the name of Haydée anywhere but in Baron's poems. Certainly they are. Haydée is a very uncommon name in France, but it is common enough in Albania and Epirus. It is as if you said, for example, chastity, modesty, innocence. It is a kind of baptismal name, as you Parisians call it. Oh, that is charming, said Albert. How I should like to hear my countrywoman called Mademoiselle Goodness, Mademoiselle Silence, Mademoiselle Christian Charity. Only then, think if Mademoiselle Danglars, instead of being called Claire Mary Eugenie, has been named Mademoiselle Chastity Modesty Innocence Danglars. What a fine effect that would have produced on the announcement of her marriage. Silence, said the Count. Do not joke in so loud a tone. Haydée may hear you, perhaps. And you think she would be angry? No, certainly no, said the Count, with a haughty expression. She is very amiable, then, is she not? It is not to be called amiability. It is her duty. A slave does not dictate to a master. Come, you're joking yourself now. Are there slaves nowadays? Undoubtedly, as Haydée is mine. Really, Count, you do nothing, and have nothing like other people. The slave of Monsieur le Comte de Monte Cristo. Why, it is a rank of itself in France, and from the way in which you lavish money, it is a place that must be worth 100,000 francs a year. 100,000 francs! The poor girl originally possessed much more than that. She was born to treasures, to which those in the 1,001 Nights are trifles. She must be a princess, then. You're right, and one of the greatest in her country, too. I thought so. But how did it happen that such a great princess became a slave? How was it that Dionysus and the tyrant became a schoolmaster? The fortune of war, my dear Viscount, the caprice of fortune. And is her name a secret? For the world it is, but not for you, my dear Viscount, who are one of my friends, and on whose silence I may rely. If I enjoy it, may I do not so? Certainly, on my word of honor. You know the history of the Pacha of Janina, of Ali Tebelen. Oh yes, it was in his service that my father made his fortune. True, I had forgotten that. Well, what is Haydée to Ali Tebelen? Merely his daughter. What? The daughter of Ali Pacha? And the beautiful Vasiliki. And your slave? Yes. But how did he become so? Why, I bought her one day as I was passing through the market at Constantinople. Wonderful. With you, Count, one does not live but dream. Now, I am perhaps going to make an imprudent request, but— Say on. But since you go out with Haydée, and sometimes even take her to the opera. Well, I think I may venture to ask you this favor. You may venture to ask me anything. Well then, my dear Count, present me to your princess. I will do so, but on two conditions. I accept them at once. The first is that you will never tell anyone that I have granted this interview. Very well, said Albert, extending his hand. I swear I will not. The second is that you will not tell her that your father ever served hers. I swear to that too. Enough, Viscount. You will remember these two vows, will you not? But I know you to be a man of honor. The Count again struck the gong. Ellie reappeared. Tell Haydée, said he, that I will take coffee with her, and give her to understand that I desire permission to present one of my friends to her. Ellie bowed and left the room. Now understand me, said the Count. No direct questions, my dear Morcerf. If you wish to know anything, tell me, and I will ask her. Agreed. Ali reappeared for the third time and threw back the tapestried hanging which concealed the door, to signify to his master that they were at liberty to pass on. Let us go in, said Monte Cristo. Albert passed his hand through his hair, and curled his moustache, and followed the Count into the room, the latter having previously resumed his hat and gloves. Ali was stationed as a kind of advanced guard, and the door was kept by the three French femmes de chambre, commanded by Mère Tho. Haydée was waiting her visitors in the first room, which was the drawing-room. Her large eyes were dilated with surprise, for it was the first time that any man, except Monte Cristo, had entered. She was sitting on a sofa in an angle of the room, with her legs crossed, and had made for herself, as it were, a kind of nest in which rich Indian silks and embroideries. Near her was the instrument on which she had just been playing. It was elegantly fashioned, and worthy of its mistress. On perceiving Monte Cristo, she rose and welcomed him with a kind of smile peculiar to herself, expressive at once of all filial affection and of love. Monte Cristo advanced toward her and extended his hand, which she, as usual, raised to her lips. Albert remained near the door, fascinated by the sight of such surpassing beauty, beheld, as it was, for the first time, and of which an inhabitant of more northern climes could form no idea. Whom do you bring? Asked the young girl, in Romaic, of Monte Cristo. Is it a brother, a friend, a simple acquaintance, or an enemy? A friend, said Monte Cristo, in the same language. What's his name? Viscount Albert. It is the same whom I rescued from the hands of the banditti at Rome. In what language would you like me to converse with him? Monte Cristo turned to Albert. Do you know modern Greek? Asked he. Alas, no, said Albert. Nor even ancient Greek, my dear Count. Never had Homer or Plato a poorer or more scornful scholar than myself. Then, said Haydée, proving by her remark that she had quite understood Monte Cristo's question and Albert's answer, then I will speak either in French or Italian, if my lord so wills it. Monte Cristo reflected one instant. You will speak Italian, said he. Then, turning to Albert, it is a pity you do not understand either ancient or modern Greek, both of which Haydée speaks so fluently. The poor child will be obliged to talk to you in Italian, which will give you but a false idea of her powers of conversation. The Count made a sign to Haydée to address to his visitor. Sir, you are welcome as the friend of my lord and master, she said in excellent Tuscan, and with that soft Roman accent which makes the language of Dante so sonorous as that of Homer. Ali, coffee and pipes. When he had left the room to execute the orders of his young mistress, he beckoned Albert to approach nearer to her. Monte Cristo and Morcerf drew their seats toward a small table, on which were arranged music, drawings, and vases of flowers. Ali then entered, bringing the coffee and chabox. As to Baptistin, this portion of the building was interdicted to him. Albert refused the pipe which the Nubian offered him. Oh, take it, said the Count. Haydée is almost as civilized as a Parisian. The smell of Havana is disagreeable to her, but the tobacco of the East is a perfume, you know. Ali left the room. The cups of coffee were prepared. with the addition of a sugar bowl for Albert. Monte Cristo and Haydée took the liquor in the Arabian manner. This is to say, without sugar. Haydée took the Japan porcelain cup in her little slender fingers and conveyed it to her mouth with all the innocent pleasure of a child when eating or drinking something that it likes. At this moment 2 women entered, bringing salvers filled with ice and sherbet, which they placed on 2 small tables appropriate to that purpose. "My dear host, and yours, Signoria," said Albert in Italian. "Excuse my apparent stupidity. I am quite bewildered, and it is natural that it should be so. Here I am in the heart of Paris, but a moment ago I heard the rumbling of the omnibuses and the tinkling of the bells of the lemonade sellers, and now I am transported to the East. Not such as I have seen it, but such as my dreams have painted it. Oh, Signora, if I could but speak Greek, your conversation, added to the fairy scene which surrounds me, would furnish an evening that I could never forget." "I speak sufficient Italian to converse with you, sir," said Haydée quietly, "and if you like what is Eastern, I will do my best to make you find it there." "Oh, what subject shall I converse with her?" said Albert in so low a tone to Monte Cristo. "Just what you please. Her country, her youthful reminiscences, or if you like it better, you can talk of Rome, Naples, or Florence." "Oh," said Albert, "it is of no use to be in the company of a Greek if one converses just in the same style as with a Parisian. Let me speak to her of the East." "Do so then, for of all themes that will be the most agreeable." Albert turned toward Haydée. "At what age did you leave Greece, Signoria?" asked he. "When I was about 5 years old," replied Haydée. "And have you any recollection of your country?" "When I shut my eyes I see it all again. The mind has its eyes as well as the body. The former may forget, the latter always remembers." "And how far back into the past do your recollections extend?" "I could scarcely walk when my mother, who was called Vasiliki, which means royal," said the young girl, tossing her head proudly, "took me by the hand, and after putting in our purse all the money we possessed, we went out, both covered with veils, to solicit alms for the prisoners, saying, 'He who gives to the poor lends to the Lord.' Then, when our purses was full, we returned to the palace, and without saying a word to my father, we sent all the money that had been given to us, as poor women, to the communals of the convent, where it was divided among the prisoners." "And how old were you at that time?" "I was 3 years old," said Haydée. "Then you remember all which was passing around you when you were but 3 years old," said Albert. "All." "Count," said Albert in so low a tone to Monte Cristo, "do allow the Signoria to tell me something of her history. You prohibited my mentioning my father, but perhaps she will speak of him, and you have no idea how delighted I should be to hear our name pronounced by such beautiful lips." Monte Cristo turned to Haydée, and with an expression of countenance which commanded her to pay the most implicit attention to his words, he said in Greek, "That is, tell us the fate of your father, but neither the name of the traitor nor the treason." Haydée sighed deeply, and a shade of sadness clouded her beautiful brow. "What are you saying to her?" said Morcerf in an undertone. "I again reminded her that you are a friend, and that she need not conceal anything from you." "Then," said Albert, "this pious pilgrimage in behalf of the prisoners was our first remembrance. What is next?" "Oh, then I remember sitting under the shade of some sycamore tree on the borders of a lake, in the waters of which the trembling foliage was reflected in a mirror. Under the oldest and thickest of these trees, reclining on cushions, sat my father. My mother was at his feet, and I, childlike, amused myself by playing with his long white beard, which descended to his girdle, or with the diamond hilt of the scimitar attached to his girdle. Then, from time to time, there came to him an Albanian, who said something, to which I paid no attention, but which he always answered in the same tone of voice, either kill or pardon." "It is very strange," said Albert, to hear such words from the mouth of any but an actress on the stage, and one needs to be saying to oneself, "This is no fiction," in order to believe it. And how does France appear in your eyes, accustomed as they have been to gaze on such enchanted scenes? "I think it is a fine country," said Haydée, "but I see France as it really is, because I see it with the eyes of a woman, whereas my own country, which I saw with the eyes of a child, is enveloped in an atmosphere, luminous or otherwise, according as my remembrances of it are sad or joyous." "So young," said Albert, falling into commonplace. "How you must have suffered." Haydée turned her eyes toward Monte Cristo, who, making at the same time some imperceptible sign, murmured, "Speak." "Nothing is so impressed on the mind as the memory of early childhood, and, with the exception of the two scenes I have described to you, all my earliest reminiscences are sad." "Speak, speak, Signora, I am listening with the most intense interest." Haydée answered with a melancholy smile. "You wish me, then, to relate the history of my past sorrows," said she. "I beg you to do so." "Well, I was but 4 years old, when one night I was suddenly awoke by my mother. We were in the palace of Janina. She snatched me from the cushions on which I was sleeping, and on opening my eyes I saw hers were filled with tears. She took me away without speaking. When I saw her weeping, I began to cry too. "Silence, child," said she. At other times, in spite of maternal endearments of threats, I had, with a child's caprice, been accustomed to continue to cry. But on this occasion there was an intonation of such extreme terror in my mother's voice that I ceased at once. She bore me rapidly away. I saw then that we were descending a large staircase. Around us, all my mother's servants, carrying trunks, bags, ornaments, jewels, purses of gold, were hurrying away in the greatest distraction. Behind the woman came a guard of 20 men, armed with long guns and pistols, and dressed in the costume which the Greeks have assumed since they have again become a nation. You may imagine there was something startling and ominous, said Haydée, shaking her head, and turning pale at the mere remembrance of the scene. In this long file of slaves and women only half aroused from sleep, or at least, so they appeared to me, who was myself scarcely awake. Here and there on the walls of the staircase were reflected gigantic shadows, which trembled in the light of the pine torches. "Quick," said a voice at the end of the gallery. This voice made everyone bow before it, like the wind passing over a field of corn. As for me, it made me tremble. This voice was that of my father. He marched the last, clothed in his splendid robes, and holding in his hand the carbine with which your emperor presented him. And leaning on his favorite psalm, he drove us all before him, as a shepherd would his straggling flock. My father, said Haydée, raising her head, was that illustrious man known in Europe under the name of Ali Teblan, Pacha of Janina, and before whom Turkey trembled. Albert, without knowing why, started on hearing these words pronounced with such a haughty and dignified accent. It appeared to him that as if there was something supernaturally gloomy and terrible in the expression which gleamed from the brilliant eyes of Haydée at this moment. She appeared like a Pythoness evoking a spectre, as she recalled to his mind the remembrance of the fearful death of this man, to the news of which all Europe had listened with horror. Soon, said Haydée, we halted on our march, and found ourselves on the borders of a lake. My mother pressed me to her throbbing heart, and at the distance of a few paces, I saw my father, who was glancing anxiously around. 4 marble steps led down to the water's edge, and below them was a boat floating. From where we stood, I could see, in the middle of the lake, a large black mass. It was the kiosk to which we were going. The kiosk appeared to me to be at a considerable distance, perhaps on account of the darkness. We stepped into the boat. Remember well that the oars made no noise whatever in striking the water, and when I leaned over to ascertain the cause, I saw they were muffled with sashes of our palanquins. Beside the rowers, the boat contained only the women, my father, mother, Selim, and myself. The palanquins had remained on the shore of the lake, kneeling on the lowest of the marble steps, and making a rampart of the three others, in case of pursuit. Our bark flew like wind. Why does the boat go so fast? Asked I of my mother. Silence, child, hush, we're flying. I didn't understand. Why should my father fly? He, the all-powerful, he, before whom others were accustomed to fly, he, who had taken for his device, they hate me, then they fear me. It was indeed a flight which my father was trying to effect. I have been told since that a garrison of the castle of Janina, fatigued with long service. Here Haydée cast a significant glance at Monte Cristo, whose eyes had been riveted on her countenance during the whole course of her narrative. The young girl then continued slowly, like a person who is either inventing or suppressing some features of the history which he is relating. You were saying, Signora, said Albert, who was paying the most implicit attention to the recital, that the garrison of Janina, fatigued with long service, had treated with the Seraskier court child, who had been sent by Sultan to seize my father. It was then that Ali Tebelen took the resolution of retiring, after having sent to Sultan a French officer in whom he reposed great confidence, to the asylum which he had long before prepared for himself, and which he called Catafingion, or the refuge. And this officer, asked Albert, do you remember his name, Signora? Monte Cristo exchanged a rapid glance with the young girl, which was quite unperceived by Albert. No, said she, I don't remember it just at this moment, but if it should occur to me presently, I will tell you. Albert was on the point of pronouncing his father's name, when Monte Cristo gently held up his finger in token of reproach. The young man recollected his vow, and was silent. It was toward this kiosk that we were rowing, a ground floor, ornamented with arabesques, bathing its terraces in the water, and another floor, looking onto the lake, was all which was visible to the eye. But beneath the ground floor, stretching out into the island, was a large subterraneous cavern, to which my mother, myself, and all the women were conducted. In this place were together 60,000 purses and 200 barrels. The purses contained 25 million of money in gold, and the barrels were filled with 30,000 pounds of gunpowder. Near these barrels stood Selim, my father's favorite, whom I mentioned to you just now. He was on watch day and night, with a lance in his hand, at the end of which was a lighted match, and he had orders to blow up all, kiosks, guards, women, gold, and Ali Tebelen himself, at the first signal given by my father. I remember well that the slaves, knowing this terrible deposit, passed days and nights in praying, crying, and groaning. As for me, I can never forget the pale complexion and black eyes of the young soldier, and whenever the angel of death comes down to me, I am quite sure I shall recognize Selim. I cannot tell you how long we remained in this state. At that period I did not even know what time meant. Sometimes, but very rarely, my father summoned me and my mother to a terrace of the palace. These were my hours of recreation. I, who never saw anything in a dismal cavern but the gloomy countenances of the slaves and the fairy lands of Selim. My father was endeavoring to pierce with his eager looks the remotest verge of horizon, examining every black speck which appeared on the lake, whilst my mother, reclining by his side, rested her head on his shoulder, and I played at his feet, admiring everything I saw with that innocence of childhood which magnifies everything. The heights of Pindus on the horizon, the castle of Janina rising white and angular from the blue waters of the lake, and the immense masses of black vegetation which, viewed in the distance, gave the idea of lichens clinging to the rocks, but were, in reality, gigantic fir trees and myrtles. One morning my father sent for us. We found the Pacha calm, but paler than usual. Take courage, Vasiliki, said he. Today arrives the firman of the master, and my fate will be decided. If my pardon be complete, we shall return triumphant to Janina. If the news be inauspicious, we must fly this night. But supposing our enemy should not allow us to do so, said mother. Oh, make yourself easy on that head, said Ali, smiling. Selim and his flaming lance will settle that matter. They should be glad to see me dead, but they would not like themselves to die with me. My mother only answered by sighs to these consolations, which she knew did not come from my father's heart. She prepared to ice the iced water which he was constantly drinking, for since his sojourn at the kiosk, he had been pushed by a most violent fever, after which she perfumed his white beard and lighted his chibuk, from which he sat watching the smoke for hours as it was dissipating in the air. Presently he made such a sudden movement that I was paralyzed with fear. Then, without taking his eyes from the object which had first attracted his attention, he asked for his telescope. My mother gave it to him, looking whiter than the marble against which she leaned. I saw my father's hand tremble. A boat, 2, 3, murmured my father. 4. He then rose, seizing his arms and priming his pistols. Vasiliki, said he to my mother, trembling perceptibly. The instant approaches which will decide everything. In space of half an hour we shall know the Sultan's answer. Go into the cavern with Haydée. I will not quit you, said Vasiliki. If you die, my lord, I will die with you. Go to Selim, cried my father. Adieu, my lord, murmured my mother, determining quietly to wait the approach of death. Take away, Vasiliki, said my father to his palanquins. As for me, I had been forgotten. I ran toward him. He saw me hold out my arms to him, and he stooped down and pressed my forehead with his lips. Oh, that kiss! It was the last. It is still on my forehead. On descending, we distinguished through the lattice work several boats, which were gradually becoming more distant. At first, they were like black specks. They now looked like birds skimming the surface of waters. During this time, in the kiosk, at the feet of my father, were seated 20 palanquins, concealed from view by an angle of the wall, and watching with eager eyes on the arrival of the boats, and holding ready their long guns inlaid with mother of pearl and silver. Cartridges in great numbers were lying scattered on the floor. My father looked at his watch and paced up and down in anguish. This was the scene which presented itself when I quitted my father after that last kiss. My mother and I traversed the passage to the tavern. Selim was still at his post, and smiled sadly on us. We fetched our cushions from the other end of the tavern, and sat down by Selim. In great danger, the devoted ones clung to each other, and, young as I was, I quite understood that some imminent danger was hanging over our heads. Albert had often heard, not from his father, for he never spoke on the subject, but from strangers, the description of the last moments of the Vizier of Janina. He had read different accounts of his death, but the history seemed to borrow new life from voice and expression of the young girl. This living accent and melancholy expression at once charmed and horrified him. As to Haydée, at these terrible reminiscences, she ceased speaking, her head leaning on her hand like a flower in a storm, and her eyes, gazing on vacancy, seemed still to see the green summit of Pindus and the blue waters of the lake of Janina, a magic mirror, reflecting the somber picture of which she sketched. Monte Cristo looked at her with an indescribable expression of interest and pity. Go on, my child, said the Count, in the Romaic language. Haydée looked up abruptly, as if the sonorous tones of Monte Cristo's voice had awakened her from a dream, and she continued her narrative. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and although the day was brilliant out of doors, we were in the gloom of cavern. One single light was burning there, and it appeared like a star set in a heaven of blackness. It was Salem's naming dance. My mother was a Christian, and she prayed. Salem repeated from time to time these sacred words: God is great. However, my mother had still some hope, and she was coming down. She thought she recognized the French officer who had been sent to Constantinople, and in which my father placed so much confidence. For she knew that all the soldiers of the French Sultan were naturally noble and generous. She advanced some steps toward the staircase and listened. They are approaching, said she. Perhaps they bring us peace and liberty. What do you fear, Vasiliki? Said Salem, in a voice at once so gentle and yet so proud. If they do not bring us peace, we will give them death. And he renewed the flame of his lance with an alacrity which reminded one of Dionysus of old Crete. But I, who was only a little child, was terrified by this courage, which appeared to me both ferocious and senseless, and I recoiled from this frightful death amidst fire and flame. My mother experienced the same sensations, for I felt her tremble. Mamma, mamma, said I, are we really to be killed? And at that sound of my voice the slaves redoubled their cries and prayers. My child, said Vasiliki, may God preserve you from ever wishing for that death which today you must dread. Then, whispering to Salem, she asked what were his master's orders. If he sent me his poniard, it will signify that the Sultan's intentions are not favorable, and I set fire to powder. If he sends me his ring, the Sultan pardons him, and I leave the magazine. My friend, said my mother, when your master's order arrives, if it is the poniard which he sends, instead of dispatching us by that death which you both dread, kill us with the same poniard. Yes, Vasiliki, replied Salem, tranquilly. Suddenly we heard loud cries. We listened. They were cries of joy. The name of French officer had been sent to Constantinople resounded on all sides amongst our palanquins. It was evident that he brought the answer of the Sultan, and it was favorable. And do you not remember the Frenchman's name? Said Morcerf, quite ready to aid the memory of the narrator. Monte Cristo made a sign to him to be silent. I do not recollect it. The noise increased. Steps were heard approaching. They were descending the steps to the cavern. Salem made ready his lance. Soon a figure appeared in the grey twilight, formed by the few days of daylight, which found their way in the entrance of the cavern. Who are you? Cried Salem. But whoever you may be, I charge you not to advance another step. Glory to the Sultan, said the figure. He grants full pardon to the Vizier Ali, and not only gives him his life, but restores him to his fortune and his possessions. My mother uttered a cry of joy, and clasped me to her bosom. Stop, said Salem, seeing that she was about to go out. You see I have not yet received the ring. True, said my mother, and she fell on her knees, at the same time holding me up toward heaven, as if she desired, whilst praying to God in my behalf, to raise me actually to his presence. And for the second time Haydée stopped, overcome by such violent emotions that the perspiration stood upon her pale brow, and she stifled voice seemed hardly able to find utterance, so parched and dry were her throat and lips. Monte Cristo poured a little iced water into a glass and presented it to her, saying, with a mildness in which was also a shade of command, Courage. Haydée dried her eyes and continued. By this time our eyes, habituated in the darkness, had recognized the messenger of the Pacha. It was a friend. Salem had also recognized him, but the brave young man only acknowledged one duty, which was to obey. In whose name do you come? Said he to him. I come in the name of our master, Ali Tablan. If you come from Ali himself, said Salem, you know that you were charged to remit to me. Yes, said the messenger, and I bring you this ring. At these words he raised his hand above his head, but it was too far off, and there was no light enough for Salem. There he was standing, to distinguish and recognize the object presented to his view. "I don't see what you have in your hand," said Selim. "Approach, then," said the messenger, "for I will come nearer to you if you permit it." "I will agree to neither one nor the other," replied the young soldier. "Place the object which I desire to see in that ray of light where you are, and retire whilst I examine it." "Be it so," said the envoy, and he retired, after having first deposited the token agreed on in the place pointed out. Oh, how our hearts palpitated, for it did, indeed, seem to be a ring. But was it my father's ring? Selim, still holding in his hand the lighted match, walked toward the opening of the cavern, and, aided by the ray of light, picked up the token. "It is well," said he, kissing it. "It is my master's ring." And throwing a match on the ground, he trampled on it and extinguished it. The messenger uttered a cry of joy and clapped his hands. At this signal, 4 soldiers of the Saraskir Khorchid suddenly appeared, and Selim fell pierced by 5 blows. Each man had stabbed him separately, and, intoxicated by their crime, though still pale with fear, they rushed into the cavern looking to see if there was any fire, and rolling themselves on the bags of gold. At this moment my mother seized me in her arms, and bounding along turnings, known only to ourselves, she arrived at the private staircase of the kiosk, where was a scene of frightful tumult. The lower rooms were entirely filled with touchdoors of Khorchid, that is to say, with their enemies. Just as my mother was on the point of pushing open a small door, we heard the voice of the Pacha loud and threatening. My mother applied her eye to the crack between the boards. I luckily found a small opening, and looked in. "What do you want?" said my father to some people who were holding a paper inscribed with characters of gold. "What we want," replied one of them, "is to communicate to you the will of His Highness." "Do you see this firman?" "I do," said my father. "Well, read it." "He demands your head." My father's answer with a loud laugh, more frightful than any threat, and he had not ceased when 2 pistols shot were discharged by his hands, and killed 2 men. The Palakers, who were lying around, sprang up and fired, and the room was filled with fire and smoke. At the same instant the firing began on the other side, and the balls penetrated the boards all around us. Oh, how noble, how grand was the vizier, my father, in the midst of all balls, his scimitar in his hand, and his face black with powder. How his enemies fled before him. "Selim, Selim," cried he, "guardian of the fire, do your duty." "Selim is dead," replied a voice, which seemed to come from the depth of our earth, "and you are lost, Ali." At the same moment the explosion was heard, and the floor of the room was shivered to atoms. The touchdoors were firing underneath. 3 or 4 pelicans fell with their bodies literally plowed with wounds. My father howled aloud. He plunged his fingers into the holes which the balls had made, and tore up one of the planks entire. But immediately through this opening 20 shots were fired, and the flame, rushing up like fire from the crater of a volcano, gained the tapestry, which it devoured. In the midst of all this frightful tumult, these terrific cries, 2 reports, fearfully distinct, followed by 2 shrieks more heart-rending than all, froze me with terror. These 2 shots had mortally wounded my father, and it was he who had given utterance to these frightful cries. However, he remained standing, clinging to a window. My mother tried to force the door, that she might go and die with him, but it was fastened on the inside. All around him were lying the Palakers, writhing in the death throe, whilst 2 or 3, who were only slightly wounded, sprang from the windows. At this crisis the whole flooring suddenly gave way. My father fell on one knee, and at the same time 20 hands were thrust forth, armed with sabres, pistols, and poniards. 20 blows were instantaneously directed against one man, and my father disappeared in a whirlwind of fire kindled by these demons, as if hell itself were opening beneath his feet. I felt myself fall to the ground. It was my mother who had fainted. Haydée's arms fell by her side, and she uttered a deep groan, at the same time looking toward the Count, as if to ask if he was satisfied with her obedience to his commands. Monte Cristo rose and approached her. She took her hand and said to her in Romaic, "Calm yourself, my dear child, and take courage in remembering that there is a God who will punish traitors." "It is a frightful story, Count," said Albert, terrified at the paleness of Haydée's countenance, "and I reproach myself now for having been so cruelly thoughtless." "Oh, it is nothing," said Monte Cristo. Then patting the young girl on the head, he continued, "Haydée is very courageous, and she sometimes even finds consolation in the recital of her misfortunes." "Because, my lord," said Haydée, eagerly, "my miseries recall to me your goodness." Albert looked at her with curiosity, for she had not yet related what he most desired to know, namely, how she had become the slave of the Count. Haydée saw at a glance the same expression in the countenance of her two auditors. She continued, "When my mother recovered her senses, we were before the Seraskier. 'Kill me,' said she, 'but spare the honor of the widow of Ali.' 'It is not me to whom you must address yourself,' said Courcette. 'To whom, then?' 'To your new master.' 'Who and where is he?' 'He is here.' And Courcette pointed out one who had more than any contributed to the death of my father," said Haydée, in a tone of chastened anger. "Then," said Albert, "you became the property of this man." "No," replied Haydée, "he did not dare to keep us, so we were sold to some slave merchants who were going to Constantinople. We traversed Greece, and arrived half dead at the imperial gates. They were surrounded by a crowd of people, who opened a way for us to pass. Then suddenly my mother, following with her eyes to look the crowd, uttered a piercing cry and fell to the ground, pointing, as she did so, to a head over the gate. Above it was inscribed these words, 'This is the head of Ali Tabelin, Pacha of Janina.' I cried bitterly and tried to raise my mother from the earth, but she was dead. I was taken to the slave market and was purchased by a rich Armenian. He caused me to be instructed, gave me masters, and when I was 13 years of age, he sold me to the Sultan Mahmud, of whom I bought her," said Monte Cristo, "as I told you, Albert, with the emerald which formed a match to the one I had made into a box for the purpose of holding my pastilles of hashish." "Oh, you're great, my lord," said Haydée, kissing the Count's hand, "and I am very fortunate in belonging to such a good master." Albert remained quite bewildered with all that he had seen and heard. "Come, finish your cup of coffee," said Monte Cristo. "The history is ended."